Cool.
Okay.
You see it? Okay. Oh, look, I think they upgraded it or something.
Yeah. It's a whole new Zoom. All right.
Cool.
So
So
good morning.
I'm good, Adam. I'm like so annoyed though at my partner again.
Okay.
So
Why don't you tell me a
annoyed.
little bit about that?
I he just doesn't listen to me. He doesn't listen to me at all. It's like every 5 minutes it's like I mentioned something and the conversation keeps going and then he asks me the same question again and I'm like, oh my God, I talked to you about this 100 times. Like, why doesn't he remember anything at all? Like, I know he doesn't focus very well, but it's just like I feel like completely invisible. Like, why do I even talk? Everything is just like, he doesn't plan, he's not paying attention, and I just feel really overwhelmed that like I have to remember everything. And then when I tell him that I'm upset about it, he usually just tells me like what I could do to improve it. like
Mhm.
like, well, you should, maybe if you communicated it this way, or like you shouldn't have said it this way. And I'm like, oh my God, that's not the point. The point is that you never listen to me and you're not listening to me. And I have to repeat myself all the time.
So he
And I
never
just don't
listens to
know how to
you.
get through to him. And I'm just really frustrated because I feel like I keep trying all of these things and like nothing is working.
All right. So why don't so just to be clear, you feel like your partner uh, doesn't listen to you, is kind of all over the place. You said he has trouble focusing.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
I think he has more trouble focusing than he cares to realize. He's never been like diagnosed with ADHD. I'm not even sure how I feel about that kind of diagnosis, but he he's just like not. It takes like he's a creative person, so sometimes I'm like, maybe it's just because he's creative and he's just like distracted by all the pretty things or something. Um, but he just really has a hard time focusing in general, and I'm not really sure why. I'm like, maybe because his father was diagnosed with ADHD and he's brought it up to me before. He's never been formally diagnosed, but then I'm like, I sometimes blame it on the fact that he's creative, but regardless of what the reason is, we don't know. He's still just like, just cannot focus. Like, even when I'm asking him, like, we had a bunch of people over and I needed help cleaning the house, and I tell him this like 2 weeks ahead of time. And then he, of course, waits till like the last second. And then I get frustrated. Then he yells at me. And I'm like, but it's the last second. Like, you're making me wait till the last second. And then I'll say, all right, well, then do this, 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 and that. People are coming in like an hour. I'm like freaking out. And then instead of doing this, this, and that I told him to do, he's like doing something that oftentimes is still cleaning, but something that doesn't even matter or wasn't even on the list.
Like what?
Like, he's scrubbing the grill. Meanwhile, I'm like, we need to like vacuum and clean the bathroom, like stuff that like really matters. And you're like scrubbing the grill, like cleaning it, like just cleaning the whole thing. And I'm just like, why? Who cares about the grill right now? Like, I need to clean the house. So it's just like, and then it's because basically he was cleaning up something else and then goes, oh, the grill's dirty, I should clean it. But I'm like, but okay, I get that. But like, why don't you do all the other, like, that's not the most important thing. And that would be fine if you cleaned last week like you were supposed to.
Hmm.
We would
Is the
have
grill
time.
even involved in this event?
Is he what?
Is the grill even involved in this event? Like, are
It
you guys
was.
having a
It
cookout?
was. We were gonna cook,
Yeah.
but like it didn't need cleaned. Like it really like, didn't need cleaned. It was just like it's just frustrating because he waits so long, and then when it comes time, he just spaces. He's just space cadet. He just spaces out, and it's just really even when we drive. Like if we're driving somewhere, it's just like, where are you going? It's like we know we're going north, and then all of a sudden he's just driving south, and I'm like, what are you doing? And then he gets angry. Like, I think that's the biggest problem is he gets really angry at me every time I point out what he's doing,
Hmm.
or how frustrated I am. And then I become like this nasty person. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, but you're not paying attention. Like at what, like, and then, sometimes it's like a big problem because he just doesn't have respect for time. So like, I tell my dad, I'll be somewhere at a certain time and, and we're already really late. And then we get in the car and he starts driving in the wrong direction. and not just like, oh, we have to turn around the corner, but like he just got on the parkway, like going far in the other direction. Mm. So it's like, I want to have like sympathy on one hand, but then I'm like, no, like you focus, he makes music. I'm like, you sit downstairs and focus on what you're doing, making all this beautiful shit, focus on this computer, on all this technical stuff, focused. So I'm like, I know you could do it. You just don't like prioritize this. But it really hurts my feelings. It's like really hurting my feelings. And then I can't talk to him about it because he gets so mad.
Mm. So so this is an interesting one because like, what I'm trying to do is just kind of understand, I guess, the anatomy of the scene, really, like the before, the during, the after. But it sounds like this is kind of, it sounds like this is almost cyclical. Like it's hard to define where this starts because it sounds like each event paves the way for the next one in some way.
That's true.
So,
yeah. Because he doesn't deal with it.
But let's try to isolate one. So we'll take this recent example that works for. That's a pretty textbook example. You're saying?
Yep.
So where would you say is the beginning of that event? Like, the before. What would you define as like the moment where the problem begins to become aware?
When
like,
he tells me to repeat myself.
Sorry, he what?
When he tells me to repeat myself, or he asks me the question that I just said 100 times. Like whenever I realize that he wasn't listening to me.
Okay, so and what are you thinking in that moment?
Fucking asshole. Like, basically, like, I get very mad. I definitely get really infuriated. Probably because it happens so much, but I just get infuriated and I feel like.
And what makes you, what do you think, what specifically about that response do you think fuels that fury?
So I guess I'm like mostly upset that I feel like I do everything. Like you can't even, like I have to literally like do everything. Like I even have to focus for you. Like it makes me feel like, oh my God, wow, like you really don't listen and I really do have to do everything. Kind of, like we would be lost in this world. If I wasn't constantly paying attention to everything, because you're not paying attention to anything. We wouldn't get anything done. That's how it makes me feel. Like I have to do everything and he's not doing anything.
Is that true? Like, would you be lost? Would you be lost if,
I don't know. I wouldn't, because I wouldn't. I would be just fine. And he would be just fine, right? Separately. Maybe. But like, I don't really, I don't know. I mean, I feel like because we're together, so speaking together, I don't know. Like, I do feel like it would be a mess if I didn't do this stuff. It would be, because he's not paying attention to anything. Like the calendar stuff that needs cleaned, if I get sick or something, the house is like falling apart,
Mm-hmm. And so, but I also want to kind of dig just a little bit deeper in there. So you're saying that what fuels the fury is the feeling that you have to do everything. Is there anything more that you feel that makes you feel so angry in those moments when you have to repeat something, when he asks you, can you say that again?
Yeah, I feel invisible. Like, what am I even doing here? Like, why am I even here? You're not even like acknowledging that I'm here. Like, we just had a whole conversation and you were somewhere else entirely. You look and he looks at me. This is the weird thing. It's not like he'll look at me and like, he'll engage me. And then 2 seconds later, ask me the same question. And I'm like, I just said that.
Now, are there other times where you feel visible with your partner? Like where you're like, wow, I'm fully in view?
Not as much as I feel invisible, but probably more like when he actually acknowledges, like when I do stuff, or like is kind, or like loving on his own. Like when he does things on his own, when he does them on his own, or like whatever it is. Yeah, when he does it on his own, when he just like, says he loves you without me prompting it, when he cleans something up without me having to tell him to, when he like comes up to me to be like physically, kind or whatever, like just him doing stuff, I feel visible.
Mm.
But it's
So
not as often.
so that's interesting. So what's an example of a time where you're just like, wow, this guy sees me?
Oh man. Honestly, like I'm not really sure. He's like he is just so weird. And we've been together 5 years and I'm still like, what the hell is going on in your head half the time? He's pretty much told me that he's actually not that complicated. He's like, no, you think all this crazy shit is going on in my head, but I'm actually pretty simple, needed person. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like that when we actually are able to make like a full connection, and I like don't have to repeat myself, and like honestly, usually it's like when we're both focused having like a real conversation, and I feel like he's focused in on it. Like when we can sit down and like it's quiet and we can look right at each other, and I can say something that might be hard, and we like get through that tough conversation, but we get through it, and he hears me and he repeats what I'm saying. That's I guess really when it is, when I'm like, I got to say something and you listened to me, and then you didn't just blame me for it. And then we had a good conversation, and then we got out on the other side.
So, and what kind of topics would you cover in one of those more productive conversations? Like, is it usually, I'm going to guess that it's not about cleaning.
No, it's usually more serious.
More serious, where you guys are like having some like, real conversation talk.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Real relationship talk. Sorry,
yeah.
Like,
yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of interesting. So, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how much time we have, so we can kind of talk about some things that maybe we can do or discuss about this. So let's think about this here. So if I understand correctly, the problem is that when you're having relationship talk, it seems like you guys hear each other. There are known markers that he's paying attention. Like you said, when he repeats what you're saying, that's a clear sign that he's taken in what you're saying. And then, but when it comes to these kinds of things that are important to you but seem a little less important to him, like when it comes to cleaning for these things, or these things that he doesn't kind of think about, and you kind of described him as being a creative type, which paints a picture of being a little less conscientious.
Also, he's a boy.
He's a boy. Yeah.
Women doing everything for him.
But then there are some other markers that he's not quite there, that he doesn't really see you, that he doesn't really hear those things. What I'd like to ask is that, aside from you being invisible, him being a boy, him being, kind of off in his own little music world, do you think there are any other explanations for why some of that information isn't going in, that maybe don't have as much to do with you? Like, can you think back?
Yeah, I don't think that they really even have to do with me. I think you're right. I don't think that they really have to do with me. I think it's just the way he is. And yeah, and it's not like he's like, it's not a purposeful thing. I'll be like, what are you thinking of? We'll like have this really like intimate, beautiful moment, and then he'll like just be like spaced out, and I'm like, what are you thinking of? And he's just like, soccer. Like, it's not like he like is that, you know, it's not like there's like, it's, he's just easily distractible. So it's like, I think that it, even though it is about me because I feel not happy about it, it's not, I don't think that if he's doing it because it's me. I think he just is like this. Like, I know he's had issues at work. Like, he just, it's just the way he is. So I don't think it's necessarily about me specifically.
Yeah.
But
So
it feels like that.
yeah, yeah,
You
because
know,
I
and I
think
had a
that
shit past relationship, and I think like that also, we've had issues in our relationship too, and I think I just connected to all these other things, to all my other relationships, instead of just like, so it's like, oh, he's not paying attention, so it must mean all these other things. It's like the shit that
right.
goes through my head is all over the place.
Whereas if you think back to like where your partner was living beforehand, I'm just curious what his room looked like back then. You
He
know,
was clean. He like takes care of himself. He just doesn't take care of anyone else.
okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. So just like, um, so I think that's an important distinction to make. I think that it's important to think about in this specific instance, if there's a way of addressing this issue without making it about evidence whether or not he cares about you for this specific thing. Um,
Well, I do
so,
do that, and I probably say that too. Like, this means that you don't give a shit. Because if you gave a shit, you would listen to me. You would pay attention when I'm talking, you know. And I'm like, you can make a couple of mistakes, you know, but like constantly, like that's got to be about me, you know. I definitely like turn it into guilt.
yeah,
Don't really know how else to do.
yeah. So I think that one thing, and this is sort of from cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's also from Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. Is that I think that what we often do is we blend observation with judgment. He didn't do this, so that means this. This person is talking while I'm talking. That means they just didn't. They don't care about me. And those things are definitely possibilities. But the difference is that we know what we know, and we don't know what we don't actually know. And what I mean by that is, like, we know that your partner didn't prioritize the cleaning, or he didn't hear functionally what you said. But what we don't know in that moment is how he really feels about you. Um, it's something that we can guess and we can have as a helpful like heuristic in the back of our mind, but we don't actually know for sure. Now, what's interesting about it is that saying is that there's a fine line in my experience between saying this means you don't give a shit about me versus when you don't do what I asked you to do, or when these things go here, it makes I feel in that moment like I am invisible. And that's maybe something that I would get in the habit of distinguishing in this particular situation.
So I statements.
So I statements, but also it's the difference between saying you did this, therefore you are this, versus you did this, I felt this, I'd like it to be different. I'd like it to work forward together.
So
And
not like deducing him to his behavior.
in some ways, because the issue with is, like I said, we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. So I know. So if I'm in this situation, you know, I say, you didn't clean, true. That means you don't give a shit. Now, I don't know that. But
Well,
what
when
does
you're saying it seems terrible.
right? But when I hear that from my partner, I can think two things. One, you don't know that, and B, I know how I feel, so blah, back. Like it gives the person the opportunity to say no is one of the things. But when being clear about the language, it's almost impossible to say. And I've had people in the past, it's been a sign of mental illness to actually say this, but to say no, you don't feel that is kind of it's kind of a hard position to be in. So when I say you did this, here's how I felt, it gives a gateway into how you're feeling, less than him. So I think that perhaps looking into a way of not just communicating that way, because I don't want to make it sound like this is all about him and how you're approaching him, but it puts a lot of stress on a person to think that their partner doesn't really care. And that might be fueling this cycle. Because as we said before, it sounds like at the end of each cycle, that kind of fuels the way for the next time. Like, he didn't listen this time, watch this, it's going to happen again.
Oh, yeah, and because he doesn't address it.
Prophecy. Yeah.
He just goes, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we get in an argument, and then there's no resolution. So the second he doesn't hear me again, it's like all over.
Right. So I think those kinds of things, because separating yourself from what his behavior is, because it sounds like this behavior that he has is kind of something that was there long before you. And in some ways, I can relate. I can be one of my favorite little anecdotes to tell is that I was at my friend's wedding. I was at the hotel eating breakfast, and I looked at my friend and I said, "What time are you going to the temple for the thing?" And he stopped chewing his Danish and he said, "You literally just asked me that question 30 seconds ago."
That's the story of my life.
Right now, like, that's, to me, is mind-blowing. Like, how did I not remember that? But and that was me. I repeated myself without knowing, So yeah, because brains are weird. Listening is weird.
That's true.
So I think looking into those two things, and I can include a link to nonviolent communication, because in my experience, you don't have to necessarily use that format, but at least having the language down of like, okay, how can I separate my observation from my judgment? Even if you're completely and totally sure it's just because he didn't give a shit. Starting to get into the habit of separating those two things might be helpful.
That's true. I'm not so great at that. Thank you. Cool.
Okay. So, if you're cool with that homework assignment, I'm looking forward to hearing about it next week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I will have plenty of moments to practice. Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it.
All right. So, should we pause
now?
Okay.
Hi, Adam. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. I think one of the things I'd like to talk about today is that I'm experiencing some difficulty with my partner. I think that we like, I think, get along very well, and we work together really well. But I also think that, like, we argue, like, a lot. Sometimes we get into into tough arguments, and like, we're both pretty intense people. Like, we can just get really into certain ideas, and then she's acknowledged that when she's feeling sad, she goes towards anger. It's something that she's very self-conscious about, because it's something that her mom does, and she knows that that's what her mom does, and so it makes her feel bad about it.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever she's really angry, a lot of times she projects onto me, and and when that anger, like, I know is usually sadness of some kind. So, and like a rate recently, I feel like it's come up a little bit more because she has a knee injury.
Mm-hmm.
And we were biking, and she fell off. She hit her knee, and so she was like hobbling for a week, but she was fine. And then she fell over at a mall and then hit the knee in the same place. And now it's just like she's going to physical therapy for the next week or two. She's going to the hospital. And, it just sucks because the weather's really great.
So she's just mad. So she's kind of just, that's what you mean by projecting.
Oh, yeah. She gets mad. She gets mad.
She's like mad that you're not hurt, and it's kind of like you get to enjoy.
Yeah. And like, in fairness, like I do stay in, like the last week I took off my week from jiu-jitsu just to hang out at home. And also I needed to heal anyway, but this week I'm going back. It's funny, like when I talk about projection, like we were having like a really interesting talk last week, and she said, like, Adam, you don't like people taking care of you, and you get really upset when people try to help you. And I was like, who are you talking to right now? Like, are you talking to me or talking to you? Like,
well, let me take a little step back really quick. So it's, I mean, you recognize these sort of patterns in her, which is really great, but let's, it could be great. We'll see. We'll get to that. But, let's kind of back up for a second and think about just like these arguments. Let's just revisit the arguments because, I appreciate too that, that you started off explaining the situation to me with this positive, I think that's sometimes a really good sign too. It's like, okay, I recognize the good, but also there's this thing. And so let's talk a little bit about these arguments. Like, is there a specific time and place that they happen? You said something about the nature being intense topics, and that you're both like really passionate about whatever you're talking about. Are these like relationship arguments, political arguments, cultural arguments, or is it just really anything that you're just...
We do argue about really all of those things. Like we like argue about all those things because like we like to beat ideas against the... What is that noise? We really like to beat up ideas and to get into them. But sometimes I think that what I'm feeling is like she worries a lot, and then she draws like the worst possible conclusion.
Okay.
From what I'm doing, or makes a lot of assumptions about me or my ability to separate ideas from one another. Like, I personally like to hear a wide range of political views and to listen to them, because I really believe that, like, unless I can understand somebody in their own words, then I don't think I understand them at all. Like, if I'm always understanding conservatives in my words, and and then I don't think I'm going to understand them, really. And then I think that this divide is going to keep on going. And so, and there's some people that like I disagree with, but I still want to like read their stuff because I find them compelling and interesting.
Let's slow down. So you've done a lot of therapizing your partner, Rachel.
Yeah.
Rachel, is her name Rachel?
Yeah.
So let's back away from that.
Okay.
Let's take a look at your actions in these moments specifically, because we have two people that you're playing off of one another, so that's clear. But I want to get a better idea. I feel like I know kind of what's going on with her, but I really am not sure what's going on with you. So in those moments, I have a couple of questions. What do you like about kind of having these riled up conversations? Like, what do you get out of it? What do you enjoy about sort of proving your point? I think you said you beating up ideas. So like, what does that mean to you? What do you get out of it? What do you like about that? What is that?
this is something I just kind of grew up with. Like I kind of grew up with like a family where like people just like to talk about ideas, and that like my dad talks about how like um, you know he one of the reasons he married my mom was that like my mom was in the world of ideas, and I feel like so that was a kind of a huge part of the culture I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And my friends are friends who like to talk about ideas. So I like to talk about ideas. I
When you
like to
say
talk.
ideas, be more specific. What does that mean to you?
Means that like if I hear a concept, somebody's like giving like a lecture and they give like a concept. Um, I was listening to a lecture and someone was talking about like this Jungian idea that like you cannot be good unless you acknowledge how bad you can be. So I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to like, and that didn't end up becoming an argument. We actually ended up agreeing that like, yeah, you probably can't really be totally good unless you acknowledge how bad you can be. And that's why, and like those kinds of ideas, like I get excited about those ideas and start trying to think about them more.
It's like you really like trying to find answers.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Or, I don't know. It seems like I'm just trying to focus on this because, it's really important to do all of those things, obviously. Like, it's
Mm.
totally good. It's a good thing to have these kinds of critical conversations and arguments and figure things out. Totally a good thing. But I also wonder, there's a space where it can be hard to manage emotionally because you're
Mm.
still taking in a lot of things. You're taking in a lot of things, and it can be a lot, especially if you are quite aware. So it's like, you go to work, you have one really tough conversation, you go home, you're having all these, you talk with your friends, so it's like everywhere you go, you're ready with your your mitts up, like I'm ready all the time to just like go in on this and figure this out. And I also wonder if that could be affecting some listening stuff going on too, which might also be playing into some of her feelings. But so I just want to dive a little bit more into, kind of what's going on in these moments that you are having these go back and forth. So then do they start off as like, kind of just like somebody just says a comment and then you just kind of like go in? But I want to also understand how they end. So we got to this conversation because you were talking about arguing. So it seems like, having a critical conversation
Mm-hmm.
starts and then it turns into an argument. So I want to figure out what is that space between. So could you describe a specific situation, the most recent one you can think of, that's like the beginning, middle, and end of that art? Like, well, you said it turned into an argument, but how did that start?
So I mean, like, so it started with like there's a psychologist and he's a pretty divisive guy, and he's like, but I was really curious about his work because I feel like some of his views are really like not so great, but then some of his the ways he talks about psychology are quite fascinating. So I bought his book.
Do you mind if I ask who it is?
It's Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
Yeah, and so he's became quite controversial, and some people find his views very troubling, and I find it's like half and half. And like I just found that like he's somebody that people are gonna have to contend with because he's out there. So I bought the book, and then Rachel did all this research about him, and some people think that he's sexist. And Rachel's very sensitive about it. She starts sending me all these articles about like how he's sexist, and I feel like this is going to make you sexist, and about like how here's all these articles about how there's like his ideas are bullshit and all these like these whole things are outdated and all these different things, and I got really frustrated because I didn't feel like I was getting enough credit to be able to separate one idea from another. Like that if there's a certain idea that seems messed up to me, that just because I'm reading the book doesn't mean that I'm going to take it in, absorb it, and it becomes a part of my thought process now. It just means that I read the book. And I just felt like I'm not getting enough credit for my ability to hold ideas as separate and to be able to read. And then also I felt like my intelligence is a little insulted because I'm just like, you know, if people weren't allowed to read anything awful, like history classes would never read excerpts of Hitler because it would just be so corrupting, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I always like felt like the whole point of being a liberal is you get to read whoever you want, you know?
Yeah.
And so in those moments, I feel like I'm like the worst is being assumed about me. And I also kind of feel like, I also kind of felt like she didn't really know really what I felt about some of these issues.
Okay, I want that. So you just hit the nail on the hammer on the nail on the nose of, you know.
So what ended up happening was like the argument itself was like her pulling out all the stops and me just being like, nope, no, I'm just want to read the book. It's interestingly written and I'm enjoying it. And I'm still reading the book, by the way. It's interesting. And so what we ended up doing was taking a political orientation quiz.
Wow, you guys are committed.
Yeah, because we wanted to like, because I wanted her to like understand what I actually felt about some things.
Interesting.
Because I always felt like she was just like, oh, okay, you want to listen to all these alternative viewpoints, all these different viewpoints. That means you agree with them now. I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. Like, I want you to know what I think. Can I ask you a
personal question? Sure. What is the ethnicity of Rachel?
Rachel we're both Caucasian Jews.
Okay. That doesn't really matter. It could matter, but the reason what I'm about to say has nothing to do with that. I'm over that. I was just curious because then I would have added things, but what I still was thinking is still standing, because I really want you to take a moment and, you know, flip this kind of script. I want you to think a little bit about the idea of, you know, you said some really important things like, feeling like you need credit, that your intelligence was being insulted, and that, you know, you didn't, you know, you can obviously like take in these different ideas. But then you also said at some point that, you know, that you didn't, which is why you took this quiz, that you felt like she didn't really understand, you know, who you really were, and that you could still be this and still take in these other things. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a few things happening here. I definitely think that there is, I think that there's some identity work that could be, some identity development sort of in this process here. I want you to think a little bit about, you know, what the differences are between your identity and her identity and what that means on a daily basis, right? Because, you know, it's a really interesting thing because you use language that typically we would hear women, you know, in the media say. Like, those are things like, I'm not getting credit, you know. I've said those things many times, just said them. You know, I'm not getting credit. I feel, you know, insulted or whatever. And I think that all of those things are valid, but I think that ultimately there's this struggle that's happening. And I think that recognizing who you are in that conversation is going to go a long way here. So thinking about, especially, we're going to talk about sexism because that's what the conversation was just about. But something that, the word that popped up for me as you were going through all of this, when I thought about her, was protection. Mm-hmm. So I thought about like, okay, here you are kind of like, okay, this is about you, but think about how she feels, this person who's the main person in her life, who, is, when we think about male-female relationships historically are very unsafe relationships often, and, is it possible that you could understand maybe where some fear might be coming from when you're in an intimate relationship with someone who is taking in what you believe is not just toxic material, but toxic material that literally has and could and will continue to affect your everyday existence in a very negative way. So I think that, kind of
the material is like the book, for example.
Yeah. Or like just, where you're getting the information from, because yes, absolutely. You can differentiate these things, but I don't think that it's really about that. So I want you to think about in those moments, how can you take her out of it? And, you did a lot of work today around, which, judging on your line of work, obviously, like, you understand these things. And so it makes sense to look at this other person. But oftentimes when we're looking at these other people and figuring out what they're doing, we're not looking at what we're doing. And I'm seeing a lot of sort of behaviors that I think are directly attached to more not recognizing like this identity power play. Because there's a power that's happening between everyone, even right here, right? In our conversation today, you're a white man, I'm a Black woman. In this case, I'm your therapist. So then I hold some power there, right? In your relationship with her. So there's always these power differentials and dynamics. And I think that is actually where a lot of this is maybe sitting. So it's not actually about having these tough conversations, maybe at all. It could be that in a lot of ways that she may be relating these things directly to her own safety, or like, what does this mean for me? If this other person is exposed to this thought, and that can be very scary for somebody. So I think, kind of introducing some understanding of that, like that power differential there, I think would be really important. That's going to take work, but I think that, that's something that is lifelong, but I think that would be important. And you also mentioned, like the beauty of being liberal, or like what it was, is something that
you get to read whatever you want.
Yeah, you can read whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. And again, I think that there's just, I'm getting a lot of language around that makes me kind of think about power in general. Sort of these sort of, intelligence insulted again. We talked about like credit, the words liberal, doing, all of these things come with something. And then often earlier when you were giving examples, you kind of had this, this, but then this, which is true, right? There's always like a binary, but it always seemed like it, was still going to be one thing or the other thing, and somebody was going to get you or you were going to get them. But either way, it was going to do something. And I think that I would really recommend maybe just like sitting with more than one thing being true at one time. So whether something is right or not is really just up to you, but whether something is true or not, it could be multiple things. Multiple truths are happening at one time. Whether I believe in them or not is a whole nother thing. Whether I agree with them or not, but multiple truths can be happening. So in your conversation with Rachel, I think there's multiple truths happening. So you're feeling these things, but I really want you to connect those things to your power in society. Because I think that when you are in a position of power, it's kind of just like a given, it's very easy to feel, that those things are being taken away from you, when in fact, in her mind, that's like probably not what's happening at all. So I think just like thinking about that in those moments, like what really about this conversation is really about this conversation, because oftentimes it's about other things. It's about fears. It's about, other things that are happening in our relationships. But I do think that oftentimes in partnerships, you are in this power dynamic. And so I think that, without taking this too much further, I just kind of wanted to start off there. I think that that recognition could be really a pretty powerful way to start, because I don't want to say that you have, like this black and white thinking, because that also makes it seem like everything is one or the other. But in some ways, I'm getting a lot of that energy too, that it's still like these arguments, this one side or the other side, or I want to be exposed to this other side, or I can't understand this if I don't do this. And, it's still kind of, and maybe just kind of relaxing into everything, just being what it is. And
Yeah.
maybe,
So I hear that, and I also like think that like I'd like to be able to do those things, but like but I do feel that like what with these like power dynamics at play is like I would like to reduce any of those feelings of fear.
for her, you mean?
No, yes, yeah, because like the thing is that like I feel like there's other ways of reducing the feelings of fear that are aside from like just don't read that book.
That's true. There are.
And that's kind of like where it kind of gets on, and that's why I wanted to take those quizzes only just to like be like, let's try to get to some level of understanding of where we're at. And
I think
like
balance is important here too.
yeah. Yeah.
Like how can you balance, like I'm not sure exactly what your house, looks like in terms of books, but I think that if you're reading someone who's considered to be quite radical on one side, making sure that that's also balanced. But I would reflect on why you also, what I'm going to say is probably quite controversial also.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that I do believe that we have to reflect on why we want something so different, right? Or like so opposite of our beliefs. Like you having this some people will say, if I had this information, then I'll be able to fight them better. If I had this information, then I would be able to, so I would like you to reflect on like what that is really giving you. We don't have to talk about it now. I think it's probably better to just sit on.
Yeah.
But just think about like, when you are doing that, when you are going to read something that is clearly what you're saying is against your values, and you recognize that this person is not necessarily, like if this person is sexist, for example, and you don't consider yourself sexist, what are you getting out of that material? And I think it's important to also say, like, forget that specifically, but diving even deeper, am I really not sexist? Like, because I think that a lot of people, I think that a lot of people, we have our value system, but that doesn't always match up with our behaviors day to day. And sometimes we exhibit behaviors that don't line up with our values, which happens. Totally fine. But maybe just seeing if that matches up, like, are you exhibiting any behaviors that may come across that way? And again, I think that this is homework. I think that this is kind of like reflection, because this is a very heavy topic, because it seems simple, but I don't think it is. I think that this is a really important thing that's happening in your relationship. This is big. This is, I think, more symbolic of deeper things coming together than just like we're arguing about, like politics. And I also want to have you practice sharing with her in a different way, maybe. So you mentioned like we took this quiz. What are other ways in the past that you feel like you've exposed the way that you think or feel or your value system to her? How are these things? How would she know these things besides having these like frustrating moments or arguments over a specific thing? But is there any other time other than an argument that you feel like she really understands your values and who you are?
Just through talking. But we're very verbal people, so like it's not always an argument. We definitely sometimes we just discuss things, and we like to talk about ideas and concepts, and that's just kind of what we do. I kind of feel like where we get into the arguments are like when we get into like the little differences. like we yeah, it's interesting. Like we yeah, it's like little differences. I don't know. I don't want to get too much into examples because that's like a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, it is a lot and we're almost done, sadly. And maybe we can pick this up, next time in terms of, what these things are. But I want to challenge the idea of little differences. I think that, you know, often, and this goes back and forth, something that she thinks is something very small could be very big for you because it symbolizes things like you're saying, like, this is not about just reading a book. This is about my intelligence. This is about,
Mm-hmm.
me getting credit for being intelligent. This is,
Mm-hmm.
so it's in your mind because it's you, it's this big thing. And in her mind, it's like, just don't read the stupid book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just using this as one example, but it could be, the opposite is happening too. Something that you think is really little is actually monumental in its symbolism for her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, the best thing to do from this point until I see you next week, what I would like to experiment with, if you're willing, would be 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely think about just trying to find like compassion in the moment, that even though, whenever you feel those conversations kind of going up,
Mm-hmm.
how are ways that you can take yourself out of it and just kind of, okay, let's just chill.
Mm-hmm.
How do we take this back to the actual conversation and not, and I'm not even going to go further than that because I don't think there's like a magical button you can push and then these things are going to end. I think, just building the awareness of, okay, it's escalating now. So if we can just start there, I see it. This is the moment that it's happening. And in that moment, trying to meet that moment like with compassion and not just like frustration, like here we go again, but just like with compassion, like, okay, I do love you and I don't want this to escalate. Let's take it back here. The second thing is definitely, I think a homework assignment could be thinking about your power dynamics. So I think power dynamics are very important. So knowing who you are, knowing what your identity means, knowing what that means where you are. So being a white American male here in America is going to be different than where you are right now in South Korea. So it's going to be different. So just be aware of that, but you can still practice this. So what is that power dynamic? Who holds that systemic power in that moment, right? And so that's going to have to do with all kinds of things that we can go into next week. But you could start with the obvious. You don't have to get so heavy into education, all this stuff. Just start with the obvious, man, woman, racial differences. Just kind of start with the basics and just kind of be aware. Doesn't have to mean anything. Just be aware that when you're talking to somebody that there is a different dynamic, just practicing that and starting with that. And let me see. There was one more thing that I thought would be a good practice. Okay, so I think what would be good also is to write down. You gave me a couple of these feelings today, which was, wanting credit, wanting intelligence, or to be seen that you're intelligent enough to handle these things. But I want you to kind of reflect on what those feelings are that you have a little bit more. Maybe there's more than just those. But I think that the last thing would be to also reflect, maybe just journal about that. If you're having these kinds of feelings in a moment, just like journal it. But I also want you to reflect a little bit on what you're getting out of those kinds of like reading things that are not the same as your value system. Not that you can't, not that you shouldn't. We're not judging anything. We're not judging anything. We're just thinking about like what you, Adam, get out of this information, which I think is a really healthy practice. Nobody will, didn't cut yourself off from doing anything. But I think it would be a really good thing for us to start to look at how that is feeding you. And could you be possibly internalizing other things without even realizing it? Like the kind of need to to argue it out. So there's other things that you can pick up from these texts and from these styles that are not necessarily just the words you read in it, but that the way that you just are, right? And it's very, it takes a lot of work to read something and separate, what's really happening. It's a lot of work because you can't, you don't know, you're going to, how you're going to internalize something. You can internalize anything. So you might be like, oh, I definitely know I'm not about any of these sexist things that he's saying or any of these racist things that this person is saying. And you can know that. But there's a lot of other things that are also happening that you might not be aware of that you are internalizing. So we want to start practicing ways to like understand fully what is happening when we're ingesting any sort of material, not just a book, television, anything on social media, people that we talk to. You're ingesting is ingesting, and it can do things to you. If you wake up and hear bad news every day, you shouldn't wake up and not listen to the news. That's not the solution to not know anything. You don't want to isolate yourself, but you do have to become aware to what it could be doing to you so that you can recognize things and balance them with something else. So if that's okay with you, I know that's a lot. Even if you only remember one of those things, I will be okay with that. But this is a lot. So I really am excited to revisit this because I think that this is a really good opportunity to have a broader conversation about what you guys are going through. So thank you for being here with me today. Unfortunately, I did a little more talking than you did because this was a tough one for me to feel like I could explain well. So bear with me, and I will be much more prepared at our next meeting.
Okay.
Thanks, Adam.
All right. See you next week.